welcome. Pine Island Research here at Untold Radio Network Studios Monday night. And here I went and redid the intro for tonight's guest. And what do? I accidentally played last week's intro, saying that Patrick was our guest, and that's not true. Dale's our guest tonight. And so, again, I apologize for that. Thank you so much, everybody who's tuned in and is hopping in the chat here. Welcome. Welcome to all those who are listening on podcast. We do the show live here on YouTube every Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern. And shortly after it's over, it's uploaded to all the podcast platforms. Most of the podcast listeners will listen to it on Tuesday at work or on their way to work, whatever. But no matter how you choose to tune in, you are appreciated. Thank you so much. Wanted to start out by saying something really tremendous has happened in the last 24 hours. If you tuned in to Coffee Time this morning, I had Brian King Sharp on the show with me. And one of the things that Brian had mentioned was that at like 6 o'clock this morning, he had checked the Kickstarter, the Kickstarter for Legend Meet Science 2. And, they set a 30-day goal. They were trying to reach $80,000 so they can complete the production and have it out here at the end of the year. And at that time, it was at like 38,000, 36,000, something like that. We've been pushing this thing all day long through social media on all the platforms trying to reach the goal. There is about 42 hours to go. And guess what? They are at $75,863. So we've got less than $5,000 to go. And we've got 42 hours yet. So it's looking pretty good. I'm hoping that, hopefully by this time tomorrow night or the next morning, we've reached the goal. If you're interested in backing the project, what I would suggest is if you click the Back This Project tab right here, and I will share the Kickstarter thing here in chat in just a little bit. But if you click Back This Project for 10, you can donate as little as $10, and your name is going to be in the credits. If you want to donate $30, at that $30 level, you got to listen to what you're getting here. You're going to get part 1 and part 2 of Legend Meets Science. Now, if you think about that, if you're going to wait till this thing comes out and buy the DVD or download it online, you're probably going to pay $25, $30 anyway. So just look at it like this. You're just pre-ordering it basically and helping them reach the goal so that they can get it done. I'm pretty excited at what all they've been working on and what they've got left to complete here. But this is going to be a great documentary, and I encourage everybody to get behind it and support it. The Legend Meets Science 2 film sequel Bigfoot documentary Kickstarter, currently at $75,893 with an $80,000 goal. But the fact that they covered the ground of about $40,000 in the last 12 hours is really quite amazing, to say the least. So let me get the link to it, and I will get it in chat here just shortly. Let me see here. Yeah, give me just a little bit, and I will get that in link or get that in the chat here. First, I want to get our guest up here, and we'll start this interview because he's got some great experiences out in British Columbia, out in the Vancouver Island area. one of the things I'm going to do first is play the super chat promo, and then we'll pull them in.
Show your support for the Untold Radio Network family of shows and join in on the conversation by using super stickers and super chats on YouTube. Got a question you want answered? Ask it live via a super chat and get real-time responses from our show's knowledgeable hosts and guests. Help keep the Untold Radio Network shows running strong. We need your support. Send your super chats and stickers now.
All righty. Well, let's pull him up. Welcome to Dale Reise. Hey, Dale, how are you?
I'm doing just fine.
Man, it's great to have you on the show tonight. Last week, we had your friend Patrick on. Patrick, is it Hetu, right?
Yes, it is.
And he had some pretty interesting experiences that he shared with us. But he kind of planted a seed and said, you guys got to get Dale on. He's not only had a lot of experiences out in this area, he's investigated a lot of other people's experiences they've had. And he put me in contact with you, and I didn't waste any time. I was like, let's do this. So I'm excited that you're able to join us.
Well, thank you.
Tell us a little more in detail where you're from out there, just so people know.
I'm actually from Campbell River, which is a northeastern side of the island. It's where Campbell River is situated is from here, there's not a whole lot of towns or villages north. So we're kind of like the hub for the northern end. This town has always had sightings from the earliest times. There have always been sightings around the town. I don't know what attracts them around the town, but there have been sightings as early, the latest one that I know of that happened was about 4 years ago around this town. So we've always had them near the town. For us, the forest is like 20 minutes to half an hour away from the main hub of the town. So yeah, we're pretty much surrounded by the forest, and there's nothing but wild out there. Nothing but.
Interesting.
There's a great water source all up and down the island.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, if you look at the history of encounter stories and everything that's taken place there, it's really no surprise that you've had these experiences and had so many things to look into and investigate, because there's been a history of them in that area for quite a while.
Well, for around this town and north, going further north, there's been plenty of them going south around some of the bigger cities and towns near the all the fringe of it. But yeah, this island is well known in the science community.
Mm-hmm.
Has been for years.
Yeah.
And really, the scientists are the ones that really gave it a name that I didn't know about until I was in my 30s, which they had dubbed this island as Ape Island.
Really? I mean, it's like huge coincidence, or you kind of wonder what the history of just that, you know, of that is, how it came about, and but
well, I know of quite a few biologists, zoologists have been up and down this island doing investigations, trying for themselves to find proof.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately for them, some of them have had a few experiences. A lot of them have kind of fizzled out. There's a lot of country to cover, and it's really, really rugged. So you got to be willing to do a lot of walking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you really got to listen to a lot of the smaller villages that are out in the middle of nowhere. because you're going to find they have a better knowledge of what's going on out in the forest than anybody else. And unless somebody actually turns around and says something in a bigger town or city, nobody really knows what's going on out in these small villages.
Yeah.
Well, I started getting calls from them, many years back, to come and have a look to see if I could solve some of their problems, because of there's native heritage in my family, so being related to them, I have some of my native family members have mentioned me to some of the smaller villages and stuff, and I've been asked to go out and investigate many of them out there, and it's where they are. There's nothing. There's no other people around for hundreds of miles.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're out in the middle of nowhere.
Well, I think that's pretty notable, not only the remoteness of those areas, but also, some areas are just really inhospitable when it comes to the ability to move through them and navigate them. And, like you said, a lot of these people that get out in that area and research, are they really willing to get back in there and get into these areas and put in the work that it takes to get to some of those areas? Maybe not. It isn't just like there's a big old path to walk down like you're at a state park or something. I mean, it's pretty tough terrain, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and a lot of it is mountainous. So, I mean, you got to be willing to spend more than just a couple days or a couple weeks. You got to be willing to put at least a month or longer out there in order to find what you're looking for.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing to just go out and try to, hear a wood knock or hear a vocalization. But if you're actually trying to establish where they're at and where the water source they use, or, where would they bed down at? I mean, things like that. You don't just walk out in a 2-day weekend and figure that stuff out. You really would have to put in a lot of homework, wouldn't you?
Yes, you would. I've been lucky in a lot of my jobs that I worked in the forestry, so it's put me out in the middle of nowhere. So I've been able to run into these places and see this stuff, and it's like, well, I've been lucky enough because a lot of my jobs that I did was I worked alone. I didn't have a bunch of others around me, so it was the encounters I had were actually truly remarkable. Much easier.
Well, let's back it up a minute and let's talk about kind of that initial pull to the subject. I mean, what was it when you were young that you developed an interest in Sasquatch, or tell us a little?
Well, at first I didn't really have an interest. It was more like a shocking, oh wow. The first time, I believe I was around 7 years old. And I was with my dad. We were up at this lake, up at a lake called Brewster Lake here on the island. And it wasn't near as developed as it is now, but we were walking along and we could hear vocalizations coming from the bush. Now, this was strange because my dad would look at me and looked at him, and he just said, well, hand me your knife. Now, he's an ex-Marine, so he's been through war. He understands what to do with out there with a weapon. So he walked into the bush. Now, we were hearing what we know now as simian talk.
Okay.
More than one talking to each other. Well, he walked into the bush, into the area that all this noise was coming from. Now, in about 15 minutes that it took him to go in and then come back out, when he came back out, he was white as a ghost. I have never seen a man that white, that afraid. He almost had a death grip on the knife that he was holding. From there on, we left. We literally walked back to where the car was, and the whole family was there. We packed up and we left. We never went back to that area. I didn't find out until later on, years later, why he turned around and left, why he was so afraid. He had never seen this stuff before. It scared the hell out of him. Now, a man who had been through the war, he knows fear. He knows how
Yeah,
to
he's been in some high duress situations before.
Yeah.
This wouldn't be new to him to feel that type of anxiety, you know.
But to see him that white, I mean, literally white as a ghost. I have never seen him so afraid in my life.
It's interesting.
From there on, I kind of lost a little interest until I was about 10 years old. Now, I usually took a walk when I was a kid to go and visit my friends down this particular road. Now, there used to be a 4-acre chunk of bush in there, in these crossroads of Westgate Road and Galarno. Now, in that 4-acre bush piece, I had my second encounter. I was walking along. I remember walking along down the side of the road, and I could get this awful smell just from part of the bush, and it just made me stop and look and shake my head. I mean, the smell was pretty gross. But I noticed when I moved a little bit further down the road, the smell dissipated and it went away. So it made me curious, and I would walk back towards the smell, and I noticed in a certain area it got real strong. And then it kind of eased off. The more I kept moving a little bit away from that area and back into that area, I noticed it started to ease. And I thought, okay, that's pretty strange. Something must have died in there, living in, because at that point the town was more forest than it was a real town.
Sure.
And there were lots of farms and stuff, and houses all surrounding in the area, but most of it you could take about a good 10-15 minute walk and you'd be in the bush. In this one little area of this 4-acre lot, I guess you could call it, I would walk by there every day. And every day I got a different encounter. Now, the second time I got an encounter from there was it started throwing out clumps of dirt and grass and little bits of rock and little bit of everything was thrown towards me in front of my path. Not at me, but in front of my path. In fact, there's a good sized chunk of wood that come flying out of there that stopped the car that was going up the road. The guy kind of asked me what it was, and I said, well, what threw it? Because it made him slam on his brakes. At the time, I didn't know, so he went into that little patch of bush, and he came out, never said a word, just threw that chunk of wood out of his path of his car and drove off. And I thought, well, that's pretty strange. He wouldn't even say anything about what he seen in there or what was causing it. But it always seems to happen when I was around. I kept seeing stuff would be thrown in my path to stop me from going any further. Until finally I got up a little bit braver and said, okay, I'll keep on going, go down, visit my friends, come back, and I'd still get this stuff trying to stop me from going beyond a certain point on the road. After a while, I just kind of ignored that rock throwing and stuff, and I started throwing rocks back inside there. You know, it's like a little kid. The hell with you! I'm gonna you're going to throw stuff at me, I can do the same thing. And I
Sometimes
noticed the
common
rock.
sense just doesn't factor in at that age like it would now, right?
No, it sure doesn't. And actually the rock throwing and the clumps of dirt and stuff stopped when I started throwing rocks back there and say, "You want to throw stuff at me? I can do the same thing." It just stopped.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's great. So I continued on. The next few days, I didn't get a whole lot uh, happening from there. But after a while, I noticed when I was walking there one day, going by the exact same path that I took every single day to go and visit my friends, I had a couple of apples with me because we had an orchard, so took some with me. And I noticed a hand sticking out of the bush as I'm walking by. Now, as a kid, I kind of thought that's pretty intriguing. And I walked up off the sidewalk over towards the bush where I could see this hand sticking out of the bush. Now, this with the hand itself was gray in color with hair on the outside of it. The palm was all gray and kind of leathery. The outside of it, from the wrist back, from what I could see, was nothing but hair. So I went over and I put an apple in that palm just to see what would happen. It dumped the apple out. And I thought, well, that's kind of strange. So I stuck my hand exactly the same way it had its hand out, palm up. And I noticed that it stuck its finger in my palm. So it did the exact same thing, had its hand out, palm up. I stuck my finger in that palm. After that, the hand went back in. I thought, well, that's still kind of strange. But I didn't really think too much of it as a kid, but I figured it out years later what was going on, which it was a submission between it and me. Now, I found this out because I did some studying years after that on chimps. That chimps will do the exact same thing. So will some gorillas. It's a submission, which seems to work because I've used this more than once after that.
And this,
but anyhow,
so this was happening when you were about 10 years old, you're saying?
Yeah.
That experience. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I just want to throw it out there in case anybody was kind of tuning in and missed the beginning of that. So that was when you were pretty young yet.
Yeah. And in the end here now, after me taking these walks down there to go and visit my friends, play with my friends, going back and forth, people told me that they said that there was a Sasquatch in there. Now, everybody in that area kind of knew there was one in there. And at that point, I kind of knew there was either. I did too, because it was feeding off the gardens, the fruit trees that were all in the houses that surrounded that area. So it had a good food source. Plus, deer would go through there. So it had a tremendous food source ready available. Well, this went on for about a month. And then I encountered a dog. The dog and I just didn't get along. For some reason, it just didn't like me at all. Now, at the end of this block, there was a little white house where a Polish woman lived. And this is where she watched the whole encounter of what happened between me and the Sasquatch and the dog. Well, I was walking along there, and I used to go by there all the time and wave and say, hello, hello. Some people would look at me and say you're weird, and some people would go, oh, okay, I understand what you're doing. And I'd always greet it as I walked by. It just got to be a habit. Now, when I encountered the dog a few times, the dog kind of just avoided me as much as possible, which is fine because usually I was quite good with animals, so I just thought it was strange with this dog. Now, this was a German Shepherd crossed with a lab, I believe. So he wasn't a small dog, and I wasn't a big kid, as it was. So one day the dog finally got to the point where it trapped me. And it turned very vicious. I mean, this thing was trying to take a chunk out of me. Now I'm in a bit of a crouched over bit of a stance, backing away from the dog into the bush. This dog is just growling, snarling, and doing faint lunges at me, slowly pushing me into the bush, slowly coming closer. Now, as this is going on, all of a sudden I can feel the ground kind of shaking slightly while I'm standing in the dirt, and it's like I didn't have time to even take a quick look until suddenly I found the Sasquatch was no more than about a foot behind me, and it let out this god-awful scream. And I mean, the scream was so powerful, it was like going right through me. It was just, oh my God, I had to crouch down and cover my ears in order to get away from the sound and the force of it coming out. Well, that dog turned tail right there and then and ran. That was it. It was gone. Now, at that point, I'm pretty happy about this thing protecting my ass. It turned out to be a female Sasquatch. I kind of knew the differences of growing up in a farm. You know the difference between a male and a female. That's easy. But this thing had protected me, and that was the first encounter I'd had of seeing this thing face to face. Now we're talking the female had to have been around 7 feet tall compared to my size. Because being elated, being protected from the dog, you know, little kid, yahoo, you wrap your arms around something, you're going, yeah, we beat this dog off kind of thing.
Did you see it fairly clearly, Dale?
Oh, I seen it perfectly clear. You could, even the Polish woman that I talked to, that same, about a good 20 minutes after this had happened, had told me that I wasn't dreaming. This is exactly what happened. Because she had seen it from her window. So I had a witness to all this. So this huge female had protected me. Now, with my height compared to her, I would come up to her, just a little bit above her knee. So she was a big female. Now, what I didn't figure out until later on was in that submission that we had done with each other, is I'd gone under her protection. Which made me, like I said, this is years later. I didn't figure this out until then. But as a kid, I thought, that's cool. I've got a buddy that's big and hairy and is willing to back me up and protect me no matter what. And I mean, I could, wrapping my arms around that thing and giving it a hug and saying, thank you for the protection that it gave me, was really quite amazing for a 10-year-old, because I wasn't afraid of it. The hair on there was actually quite soft. So some of the longer stuff was, well, a little coarser, but underneath that, the hair itself was actually quite soft. And that dog, I found out, which it ran all the way home down a block, raced into his house, and went under the owner's bed, and now it took that owner 2 weeks to get that dog to even go outside. That's how bad it had been scared off by this big, awful scream that she had bellowed at it. It was amazing. I mean, the guy came and asked me about it couple hours later, and I told him what had happened. He wasn't a very well-liked person on the block as it was, but because it had scared his dog so bad, years later, he bought the property, had all the trees taken down, and that was the last time I seen the Sasquatch in that particular spot, because she would go there every year.
How would
Every
you
year.
describe the area? I mean, that is it kind of rural, or is it more
Yeah, it's a real rural area. I mean, there were houses all over. There were the old time, everybody had a garden, everybody had fruit trees.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I suppose everybody had at least a couple apple trees in that area, but I was just trying to draw that mental image, is it, you wouldn't describe this as being like in town,
Well,
it be one of
this
those
is
areas that felt like it was rural even.
very rural where we lived, which was about 3 blocks up the road. And we had a farm, so seeing deer and having fruit trees and stuff, everybody had fruit trees. Everybody had a garden. You didn't go to the grocery store for much except for maybe some bread or something like that. Most of the stuff you grew yourself. So it had a good food source.
So, and trying to not factor in experiences that you had after that, at just this point at 10 years old, at that point, can you recall pretty clearly the details of what it looked like? I mean, you remember the height and stuff.
Oh yeah. It was like, for me, it would be like yesterday, seeing it yesterday. I mean, the height,
like describing an aunt or something. I mean, it's not like there's any
exactly.
gray area in your mind.
Yeah, there is none. I mean, when you see one face to face, as close as I've been to them, you never forget, because it's like, it'd be like seeing your brother and going, well, yeah, I'm not going to forget him.
Yeah.
No
How
matter
would
how
you
old he
describe
gets.
some of the, I mean, what are some of the descriptors other than its height? That, I mean, at 10 years old, a lot of adults seem large, but I mean, when you looked at this thing, the body mass, things like that.
I mean, it was at least, it had to have been 4 feet at shoulders. Now, she was slightly barrel chested, being a female, you could see the breasts. Okay. That's a definite. The face was in between an ape and a human. It had like a human nose, but it had the the head
that brow
had its little pointed piece. The face wasn't so hairy. It was more of a leathery skin. So you could really see definition. You could see the lips, you could see the nostrils, you could see the muscles in this thing move. I mean, the hands were huge, the feet were huge. The muscle tone on this was unbelievable. You would think it was like a female football player or rugby player, with the size of the legs, the thickness of the thighs, the arms. You would think she was a bodybuilder. I mean, the muscle tone was there.
So the way you describe your encounter with it kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it kind of comes off more that at 10 years old, you were really kind of curious about this thing more than frightened by anything.
Well, yeah, because every time I would talk to somebody and I'd say, well, did you hear about the Sasquatch in the bush? And everybody would said, yeah, we've known about it for a while. It's no big deal. Doesn't do anything to anybody. Won't hurt you. It's just after the gardens and stuff. So to us, it was like a stray dog kind of thing.
Yeah.
As a kid, you're curious about it, but you're not afraid of it. You got no reason to.
It almost feels like a lot of the people in that little, area, even if they hadn't seen it, they didn't doubt that it was there. You know, they had enough people around them that they considered credible that talked about it, that it just seemed normal almost.
Well, yeah, during certain times of the year, she would come into that area for all the gardens and the fruits. And of course, being close to the ocean, people would bring their fish, and she'd be getting a food source all the time. I mean, how many people would put their fish in the cooler, throw it in the backyard, and say, okay, we're going to leave it there for now till I get this other stuff so I can get ready to deal with the fish. Well, she'd be going in, she'd be grabbing salmon that were freshly caught. So she had a great food source. She had no reason not to go from there because nobody had chased her out of there. Nobody had threatened or shot at her because they couldn't, because of the area that they were in.
Mm-hmm. Tim
Everybody
from the Bigfoot
was there, but nobody was afraid of her.
Tim from the Bigfoot influencers asked, were the breasts covered in hair like Patty's was?
Only the tops of it. Only the tops. I mean, you got hair
like
coming
the
down.
Shoulders and down the top of the chest had hair on it, but it got barer the lower it went.
Exactly. You could definitely see that they were breasts. You could see underneath the leathery skin underneath as well, just the same as you could with the patty film.
Interesting. So obviously, you know, this wasn't something where your introduction to the subject didn't come from a comic book or, you know, seeing it in a movie or something like that. This was from a real experience for you.
Yeah. Oh, yes. And I mean, back then, they didn't have Sasquatch shows on or anything like that. So
I tell people I can remember, you know, like when I was growing up in the 70s, I can remember going to a Saturday matinee movie at a theater and seeing a little blurb on the PG film, like before the movie starts, you know, things like that. But it wasn't really, there wasn't enough information. And in, you know, 30 seconds, it's over. And, you know, but I can remember that. I just don't remember ever seeing it in a show or a movie or, you know, I tell people I never had an uncle that sat around the campfire and told me about his experiences and things like that. But you, from an early age, it almost sounds like enough exposure to people who had been around them that for you to actually have an experience at a young age, it was pretty well accepted by adults when you would talk to them about it. It wasn't like they're like, oh, you're imagining something or something like that.
No, most adults that I talked to about this, they knew they were around, and they just said, well, that's great. As you know, I'm glad that she was there to back you up. Was like, wow. I was surprised. Because, you know, you get a little kids coming up with stuff like this, they're normally going to say, you know,
sure,
you're making a story.
Got an like, active imagination or whatever, you know.
It's like, well, how do you come up with an active imagination when you can describe them perfectly at a 10 years old when you've never seen them ever in your life before?
Well, that's why I asked the question, you know, as an adult, any encounters that you have, it's not hard to recall descriptives and stuff. When you think back to like 10 years old or, you know, at that age as a youngster, I'm not sure I could tell you where we went on vacation when I was 10 years or things like that, you know, let alone try to recall little details. But for you, it was a impactful enough experience that you actually recall all of the details of looking at it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, It's not every day that something like that, a piece of wildlife or a creature from the wild, will protect you. It's just unbelievable. I
That
believed it. She did a lot of that out of loneliness. I mean, they get lonely just like we do.
yeah, I would, I think you've probably put some thought into that now as you've grown up, looking back at that experience, and that's similar for me. I mean, I had an encounter at 18, and now that I'm 54 years old, I look back on that and I start putting maybe some context into the whys and the questions that I had where maybe I didn't understand that then. And you bring up a good point. I mean, if you've got one that's maybe an older female that doesn't have any youngsters in its care or whatever, maybe it spends a lot of time during the day alone. I don't know, it's hard to say, but um I would like to ask, when you when you got older, like through did these things kind of keep happening, or your experiences keep occurring,
Yeah.
fairly regularly throughout your childhood up through being an adult, or
Oh yeah. We used to see them all the time going up to the lakes, around certain lakes. They would come in close to where we're camping. Uh, we could smell them. We could hear them moving through the bush. We could hear them grunting, the odd growl. Because of course, lots of times wherever we camp, of course, we made ourselves a toilet out in the bush. And sure as
Mhm.
shooting, you're going to find them around there. And I've seen them more than once, crossing the highway from this one lake that we used to go to uh, as teens and stuff, which was Echo Lake. And before they blasted out this big rock wall, I watched one jump from the road up to this rock wall and climb up and over to get away from where we were, because there was quite a few of us. But they used to come into camp all the time. We used to hear them screaming out in the hills, across
Hmm.
the lake and on the other side in the mountainous territories. So this was a regular occurrence. We used to see them walking through open slash on our way out to the lakes all the time. So it was a regular thing.
Hmm.
I found out later on that uh, if there's too many males or females in a clan, they'll kick out that one male because they really don't like to interbreed. And you'll find the young ones will hang around schools if there's enough bush for them to get close enough. They'll hang around the bush because they're in the same age limit.
You think they're just intrigued, and their curiosity of hearing laughter and things like that are kind of
Well,
make
yeah.
them flex that curiosity?
Oh, yeah. Another encounter was near this one elementary school. Of course, the back lot's all changed now. It's all houses and everything. Uh, Back then, it used to be a good thick bit of bush. And there was a young one. Oh, I'd put him probably around 14 or 15 years old because he was around 6 foot. Uh, Gangly, skinny. So you knew he was just
Just didn't
still
have that
growing.
big adult body mass to it, you're
No, he
saying?
was still, it's just like most teenagers. You're skinny, you're gangly before you start filling out more, the older you get. So there was one that was seen around the elementary school. Now, we used to, from the high school, we used to have to jog through this area to get up into the road. We used to have to do a 4 kilometer jog every day. That was part of the school curriculum, part of PE.
Hmm.
And going through here, we used to encounter one always just inside the fringe, near that elementary school. In fact, it actually stepped out of the bush. It scared a few of the kids, but a lot of them were really intrigued. A lot of the girls and the boys and stuff were intrigued that it was standing there in front of them. Not trying to do anything, just really trying to interact with other kids its own age.
So was this school? So just trying to follow along here. Would the school's kind of a rural setting? Would you say it was, pretty heavy tree lines and things like that around it to where there was cover for it to?
Oh yeah,
be
yeah.
in?
There used to be. You used to have to travel down to where this little creek bed was, and this creek bed ran straight through there. Now it was heavily thicketed with trees all through this creek bed, so it had a perfect place to go in and out, and it could hang around that. Even till this day, part of that creek bed and part of the trees are still there.
You hear a lot of accounts of people saying that, children laughing, things like that, in campground settings and remote settings, that they feel that is intriguing to them. I mean, and now you're talking about, a school that 5 days a week is going to have recess 2 or 3 times a day, where you're going to have kids projecting that sound in a pretty rural area. And for those, I see Blanton was asking in chat, where was this at? So this was on Vancouver Island, right? This area.
This is in Campbell River, yes.
Yeah.
And this would have been around, let's see, would have been around 1968, the second encounter. The first encounter would have been around 64, 65, somewhere in there.
Would you say that this school and this setting, this small, tight-knit community, I mean, it really, an area in a setting like that does kind of feel like what you typically hear about with different tribes and different Native American culture, their communities, very close-knit, a lot of folklore, a lot of tradition, things like that. Would you say that these other kids that saw this, if they went home and told their parents about it, would it be kind of just common culture that these parents would be like, yeah, it doesn't surprise me?
Yeah. A lot of people, unless somebody panicked and said, oh my God, this thing lunged at a child or tried to do this, most parents would just say, yeah, okay.
Well, it just wasn't perceived as a threat, you're saying, by these.
It wasn't. It never was.
Anybody in the community.
No, because as far as I remember and as far as I've ever known, and I've been in so close to them, I've never been put in danger by them. I've been bluff charged by them, but I just kind of laughed that off and gave them a little bluff charge back, and that was it. It just kind of ended that way. And I was like, well, there was no threat. If you don't act aggressively towards them, they won't be aggressive towards you. They'll be curious. They'll try and get closer, but they won't be aggressive.
Yeah. I mean, I guess one of the things that intrigues me is the idea that, one or a family group of them could kind of get acclimated to a very small population of people that they just don't generally perceive to be a threat. Meaning, some of the Native American communities, the way, way back when you hear how they talk about the communication and things that may have taken place between these small communities and those Sasquatches that were in those areas. It's almost hard from today's culture and perspective to look at that and say, that doesn't make sense to me, right? Like, why would it want to be close to you? Why would it naturally? But, it's a little bit different time. If you're talking about a very close-knit community that has apple orchards and all these things that it would maybe look at as resources, and it's never being met as if it's a threat. Nobody's ever pulling a gun on it or screaming at it or things like that. I guess you could visualize how something like that could happen. I don't have any experience with it. I didn't grow up like that. So when I hear you share this, a lot of it, it's like, whoa, this is a lot. But yet I'm trying to envision that area, that community, 1966. I mean, things look different then, compared to now, obviously.
Well, yeah. And I mean, the only time you ever seen anybody with a gun was when they went hunting. Well, if the wildlife came into your yard, you didn't have to worry about packing a gun everywhere. You shoot them in your own yard if you were smart enough, and because that's what we used to do, is we'd hide up in the apple tree and shake the apple tree, drop some apples on the ground as deer were coming through the yard. Just lower the gun down through the tree and just pop yourself a deer.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't hard.
I know Sharon asked in chat, and I know that, this is back obviously way before smartphones and things like that, but did anybody ever try to photograph it or anything, or did they just kind of look at that as, let's not go there? Or what was the mentality in that?
Well, back then, most of the cameras were the older ones. There were a few people that took pictures whenever they did see one, but of course the cameras, as quick as they are and as fast as they are, it's really hard to get a camera shot on them unless you're encountering them face to face, fairly close, and they're willing to stand there and almost pose for you.
Well, then you also have to factor in, there's no internet, there's no Facebook. I mean, it's not like you can take a picture and immediately put it out to the world. You kind of wonder if there isn't a few pictures that exist that are in cardboard boxes in somebody's attic of a grandchild. It's like,
not everybody
who
walked
would you
around
have given the pictures to, know?
And I mean, it's not everybody walked around with a camera, because back then you didn't.
Sure.
So having face-to-face encounters was a normal thing. I mean, you'd see it as long as you weren't aggressive towards it, and it wasn't aggressive towards you. You kind of ignored each other and just moved on with your life because, I mean, you seen one, but it wasn't that big of a deal.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I know a lot of my friends had seen them as well, and of course they just said, yeah, we've seen them before.
So did you, I know that eventually you started a career and you had a career that really brought you out into the wilderness a lot. Was it the Forest Service or a forestry type job?
Yeah,
I'm curious, as you got to be an adult, your childhood experiences were kind of in this one little bubble in that area. Did you start having experiences outside of that area as you grew up?
Oh, yeah. Yes, I went into the logging at a young age. My father was in logging. My brothers were in logging. I went into logging. The first time I seen one when I was logging was on the mainland. And we were in this valley that was it was a 10-mile long valley. And we heard it long before we seen it. Now, the setting for this is, here we are, we're in this low bit of a valley, up on the bank. All the trees have been stripped up to a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
there was a 6-foot ditch put on top of where all the trees had been stripped and logged off from that one area. Now, that was the reason why that was because when it rained, it would not wash all that open bare ground down. Now, again, this was around 11 o'clock. We could hear this thing, well, about 10 o'clock. We could hear this thing hollering way back in the distance. Now, we got machinery running. You got guys that are yelling back and forth, trying to give each other signals about what logs they want taken first and what stuff you're going to pick. Being a chokerman, you're out there and you got nothing but noise above you. Now you can hear this thing screaming as it's walking. It's getting louder and louder and louder in this valley. It's screaming, and it's gotten to the point where it's louder as it's getting closer than the machinery that's roaring away. Now you got two large machines making a lot of noise.
Mm-hmm.
Big old heavy diesel machines.
Yeah.
And this thing is screaming, and we can hear it and hear it and hear it getting louder and louder and louder because it's echoing through the valley. And as it's coming along, after a while, the machinery, the guys running the machines, they shut off the machines because they can hear it right in the cabs. Now they can hear this thing screaming. Now, as it comes out of the bush and it starts walking in this ditch, it starts tossing logs out there that would take 6, 8 men to lift out of its way. Now, these are broken pieces. It still take 6 guys to lift it, to throw it out of the 6-foot ditch. Now, you can see 4 feet above that ditch. The upper chest, the shoulders, the head, they're still 4 feet above that 6-foot ditch that it's in. And you can see it walking along this ridge where the ditch is, and it's still hollering and screaming.
So pretty much everybody on the crew, those operating machinery, those who weren't, all saw this.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Everybody did. Now, this went on for a good, well, it was in the ditch, I'd say another 20, 25 minutes before it up and went into the valley in the next side of the ditch. And you could still hear it receding away, still doing its scream. Now, these were long, drawn-out screams. Very long. So, I mean, to be as loud as they were, that's some big lungs.
Did you sense that it was really just trying to project its displeasure with what you were doing, or was it trying to actually, scare you?
No, actually, I think it was trying to communicate with others of its kind to let them know that it's in there, coming towards that area.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It's like a wolf will scream, will howl from a mountaintop or off on the side of a mountain, and you'll hear another one off on the other side of the mountain, of another mountain that's in a valley-ish area. You're going to hear the wolves communicate to each other. Same thing with a Sasquatch.
Yeah, you think that a lot of times those vocalizations are just identifying each other's location and things like that, and
yeah, exactly. Now I've encountered
because you say this thing was moving. I mean, from the first time you seen it, first identified it moving that ditch, if it went that long of a time before it crosses over a ridge onto the backside, and you can still hear it receding, I mean, it's had to have covered a lot of ground.
Oh, yeah.
It would make sense that if there are others in the area that maybe it would vocalize or do something to let them know where its current placement is,
Exactly. And I mean, this actually was in where the camp was actually off of Lemon Point, where that guy got snatched by the family, by the Sasquatch, and taken to its little rural camp with his family. This is the same area. So
it's intriguing. So
we were told that they were around, but not to talk about it too much.
Yeah. So did when you know, this was your first time seeing them while being on the logging crew, were any of the equipment operators or other people on your crew, was it all their first time seeing it out in that setting, or was there some people on that crew that while they were logging, they've seen them before?
Oh, with some of the guys that work there, they said, yeah, we've seen them before. And a lot of them, a lot of the chokermen that I was working with at the time, some of them were really newbies. They were new guys that had never been out in the bush, so it was a first for them.
Yeah, welcome to the job, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Rude awakening to.
And I mean, it's most of the operators says, yeah, we've seen them before, we've heard them before. It's just never as close as this. And I mean, really, that ridge was no more than 150 yards.
You think there was ever anybody on these crews that just flat out, once they've had their first experience like that, just quit and said, I'm not going to do this? They don't pay me enough to do this?
Oh yeah, there was like 4 of them that after this encounter, at the end of the day, they quit. They had to call in for a plane to come and get them out of there, because they refused to go back out there.
So throughout your career, you've had multiple times where you've had experience now, and I know that's hard for some people when they say, dude, it's so hard to even the chances of having one experience, but to go out and have several like that, a lot of them. But yet when you're on a logging crew working in kind of a high value target area where there's a ton of encounters, a history of encounters, and you're in those remote areas every day doing that, that's a little bit different equation to work out than somebody who just goes out 4 or 5 times a year. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I mean, I've also spaced trees here on the island. Now there, you're working by yourself. The nearest guy is usually anywhere from a half a mile to a mile away from you. So in spacing trees, it's no good to be too close, because you're going to wind up dropping trees on each other. So
yeah.
So working alone like that, you tend to run into this a lot.
So during your course of being in the logging industry, you know, you've told us now about your first experience out there in doing that for a living. Are there any experiences that you were around that you would say were really remarkable or really stood out?
Oh yes. I remember working in the Nemkish Valley here in the island. Now, I'm spacing trees down in the bottom of the valley. I was told that there were Sasquatch in this particular area that they had given me to space out. And that is where you cut everything down within a 12-foot distance of each tree. So it's really opening up the area. Now, in this, the forestry practices didn't allow you to do certain things, but they wanted you to drop trees in a certain way. The only reason that most spacers didn't do this was because it was precision falling and it took time. What they wanted you to do was to drop trees down 3 to 4 feet high and make squares, so that it would give refuge for the wildlife, the babies, to be put in for the mothers to leave their babies in there. This way, it forces a predator to come in from the top, but it allows the young ones to be able to get away through the bottom.
So instead of falling all your trees the same direction, you're saying they were falling them at 90-degree angles to actually create geometric protective shapes.
Exactly. Which I figured out a really, really easy way of doing it. So it was fast, it was efficient, and it wouldn't take long to drop these trees in that way.
Mm-hmm.
You just had to be smart in how you did it. I used to do this. I used to do acres and acres and acres of this. Most areas that I had to space, I was usually given a 5-hectare area to deal with. So I would do acres and acres of these squares for the wildlife to give the mothers to give their young refuge. I found in the particular area that I was working in, the Sasquatches were doing the exact same thing, leaving their young in there, because they figured it out that any predator had to come in from the top. Could not get it at it from the bottom, could not get it at it from the sides because of the way the trees were stacked.
So just to help me and others draw the mental picture, I mean, are you talking about dropping 4 trees in a square pattern? You basically got a stump in each corner, okay, to drop it into a wall shape. Were you guys dropping multiple trees to actually that, like on one wall there would be several trees laying in that pile?
Oh yeah.
Or was it just 4 trees to create a square?
It'd be like as you're cutting the tree down, you push the tree in the direction you want it to fall, and it would land in a straight line. And you keep doing that. And,
okay.
And as
so
you're
you're talking about
sideways,
having, you're talking about having like 4 or 5 trees and then 4 or 5 trees and 4 or 5 trees. So that when you say over the top, you're not talking about one log over the top. You're talking about several trees making a pile in one direction.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So you're as you're cutting, because usually it's pretty thick and there's a lot of trees. So you're dropping trees. You go, okay, there's 4 this way, and then you're slightly moving down, because you got to remember 12 feet all the way around one tree.
Mm-hmm.
So all those trees that you're dropping, you're putting into squares. So one tree could be like 50 feet long. You could do, easily 5, 6, 7 different squares just from one tree. So you're dropping a lot of trees, but you're doing this quickly and efficiently.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, I found the Sasquatch were using them for the exact same purpose that I've been falling trees like that for.
So when you were out there, you saw signs that they had been there, or that you visually saw them using?
No, I visually seen the young
in
the squares. I mean, you can see through this because at that point, there's not too many limbs that are in your way. You can see where the young are being left. Now, I've walked up, I got to a point where I had a cut trail. You always got to put a cut trail in case somebody's hurt so you can get them out of the bush. Easier than trying to jump over logs and stuff. So I'm walking along my cut trail, and I spotted a newborn baby in one of these little squares that I put in. Now, when I seen this, I was intrigued. It was like, oh my God, that's just a little tiny, tiny thing. I mean, this couldn't have been any more than maybe a year old, if that, if I was to age it. And I noticed
would you see, like several of them like from the same family group or?
Yeah, they would be using these squares to lead their young while they went out foraging. But what we don't know is what I didn't know until I figured it out later on is there's always an adult somewhere close by watching, always. Now, this day happened to be a female because when I seen that young one down there, I kind of turned off to I noticed some movement off on the side of my eye, and I looked, there was a cougar was going through the plots that I had done. Walking on top, looking down, walking up, smelling. You knew it was trying to hone in on the really young ones. Now this cougar's getting closer and closer. And I thought, well, I could just walk away from this and leave this little baby to itself. But no, that's just not going to work for me. I can't see leaving a baby to a predator. It just not in me to leave alone. So I picked the little one up and I moved a little bit further up the trail. I put it back inside one of the squares, but I noticed the cougar was must have gotten its scent because it was following, and it was closer this time. So I figured, okay, I'm gonna have to defend this young one, and my chainsaw just is not gonna do it. So the saw is down on the ground. All I've got on me is a file and a small knife that I usually carry in the back of my pouch. I got wedges. I got everything in that pouch. And I have to stand there and I'm looking around looking for something bigger than a little twig or a little pebble to try and scare this cat off. And I start yelling and screaming, and I'm finding sticks and rocks and stuff, and I'm throwing them at the cat, trying to get this cat to take off. And the cat's slowly trying to circle in and around, trying to get by me to get at the young one. But I'm keeping that thing at bay, and it's gotten to the point where it's no more than 10 feet from me. And the little one's just inside this little square that's where my foot is inside, and I can notice I can feel this thing grabbing onto my leg. I didn't think too much at the time about what it was trying to do, but it was just hanging on just because of all the noise, I guess, scared it. And the cat's starting to growl and scream because I'm just not going away. And I know it's got the scent of this young one because it's really trying to figure a way of getting around me to get at this young one. And I'm screaming and yelling at this cat and I'm throwing shit at it. And then all of a sudden, a big chunk of tree comes out of nowhere and just goes whipping right by my head. Slams into the cat's flank. And I hear this loud scream. And I turn just quick enough to see this female come racing out of the bush, tossing bits of chunks of tree, chunks of wood, and throwing it at this cat and screaming at this cat before the cat finally turned around and booked it out of there. Because she was getting pummeled so bad that the cat just gave up. And I would give up too at this point. Now, where the female stopped, she stopped no more than about 3 feet from me. And I'm looking at her, and she's looking at me, and I could feel this little one wrapped around my legs. And it's like, well, I can't go anywhere with this young one attached to my legs. So grab the little one, look at it, hold it for a little bit, look at the female, hand her the baby, She looks at the baby, looks at me, and I'm just kind of saying, well, I was just trying to protect it from the cat, kind of thing. She takes the baby, one big massive hand grabbed the baby and put it up to her chest, and she laid her hand gently on my chest and held it there for a good 15 minutes. Now, as far as I could figure out, she was just saying thanks for taking care of her young one. It was the gentlest of all touches that it would be about as gentle as you would turn around and touch your buddy for doing you a favor. You know what I mean?
Do you think that she witnessed you trying to fend this cat off, so maybe there was an understanding that you meant no harm, obviously?
Oh, I would think so.
That maybe you sense that maybe she almost felt like there was an indebted notion there.
Oh, I would think so, because I mean, the intelligence, the way she looked at me, the way she touched me, I was able to touch her. She wasn't trying to bash my head in for touching her baby, for even holding the young one. It was more of a thank you.
Wow.
And
Yeah, you don't hear too many people sharing an account where they actually touched one, let alone, held one. Let me ask you this. Other people on these logging crews that worked with you, had any of them ever shared with you where they had experiences like that, where maybe they had been that close to one and interacted like that with one?
Well, most of them, I've only had a couple of guys that openly told me that they were real close to one. They've never had the encounter that I had, but
yeah,
they'd
interacted with one, close range.
Yeah, but I mean, they weren't openly saying anything, because usually if you did, you got fired. The companies didn't want people to go around telling this, because now you got scientists and everything else stopping you from doing your job because they want.
I would suppose it's not good business to have your logging employees on the evening news telling those kind of stories.
No, because you're not being productive. You're not cutting down the trees. You're not logging. You're not doing
well, and
your
you're
job
raising enough concern that there might be an effort to keep you from continuing to cut down trees if we're going to acknowledge that these things exist out there.
Exactly. And back then, all they wanted was their production. They didn't care, and it was best to just keep your mouth shut if you wanted to keep your job. And that's, even till this day, that's basically the theme of most forestry is, never mind about them, do your job.
Yeah, I know that I've got some friends that work in forestry up in, I see them every year when I'm up there hunting in the Montana and Wyoming area. I'm really looking forward to this year because I drew archery tags in Montana for white-tailed deer, moose, and bighorn sheep, all three in Montana. I mean, it was like hitting the lottery. I've probably applied for 15 years for bighorn sheep, never got close to drawing it. But I got the moose and the bighorn sheep tags with my whitetail tag. But I know a lot of forestry guys up there that I keep in contact with because they're the ones who have the pulse of what's moving where, where our elk herd's currently at, where are the moose, where is that most activity happening. And those guys have kind of given me that sense that when it comes to anything, whether or not you're seeing lights, whether you're seeing Sasquatch, you don't talk to anybody higher than you about it. There's guys that are in these fire towers and things like that will talk with each other, but they don't talk to higher ups about anything.
Oh yeah,
They're
that's
so
right.
afraid that there'll be recourse from that.
Oh yeah, they're guaranteed. You'll be more than likely fired right off the bat because that's going to stop production, and they don't want that.
Hmm. Well, that's
Can't make a,
interesting.
you can't make a buck if you're not allowed to log the area.
So you've had other people who have came to you with experiences that you've investigated kind of their accounts too. Tell us a
Oh
little
yeah.
bit about that. Is there any of them that really stick out? Like when you
Well,
went and looked at it, you thought this is really a remarkable situation, or
sorry.
that's all right.
Well, I've been in. There was a bunch of students, biology students, that were out doing some work out near this camp that I knew. It's really, really out in the middle of nowhere. I think they were studying the wolves on the island here. And a lot of them were, guys that were city born people that went into biology to get themselves whatever they wanted to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And they had been hearing strange howls and knocks and stuff out when they were trying to do their jobs. And I got asked more than once to go out with a group of them to see what the problem was, what it could be, because I've heard every piece of wildlife that you could ever hear out in the bush.
Mm-hmm.
And I know what is out there, what makes what noise, what makes what smell.
Yeah, I know to
And
a
there,
lot of people, canine sounds, wolves and coyotes especially, it's a little confusing to them. But when
yeah,
you're out in these remote areas, you really get tuned in to the sound
oh,
and vocal range that a wolf is capable of.
oh
To where when
yes,
you hear something outside of that, it seems pretty distinctive.
oh yes, 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 it is. Now here on the island, we don't have coyotes, but we do have a very large wolf population on the island. We have emperor elk, which are the largest elk in the world. We have lots of white-tailed, black-tailed deer here. So there's a large population of wildlife.
Yeah.
Now, when they're doing their work on the wolves, and I got asked to go in and kind of guide them through this one area, I knew where there was like 7 different wolf packs because of my experience of working out in the bush. You learn what animals are where and what area that they're in.
Sure.
So I take them out, and I've got 2 professors and 6 other students with me. And there's this old log cabin that they were using for years as their main base. And we're out there, and it happened to snow while we were out there. So anything movement, you're going to see the tracks. So I was able to find the wolves easy enough, and we were on our way back after spending 3 hours of tagging and weighing wolves in this one area, and I came across tracks of Sasquatch moving through the bush. You could see them. They're very clear and they're very distinctive in the snow. So I mentioned it to them, and they kind of laughed and giggled about it because they didn't believe that they were real, except for the professors. The professors were the ones who said, you know, stop making these stupid noises like this because this is fact here that this guy's telling you about. You should learn to shut up and listen to him. So I'm bringing him back to camp, and one thing I noticed was we were being trailed. I noticed that because we were being flanked on either side. And I stopped a couple of times, and they said, "Well, what?" I said, "Well, we're being followed. We're being flanked on either side of us, and it's not wolves that are flanking us."
What was the giveaway sign for you that you could tell this?
Well, as I'm walking through, I noticed when I first spotted the tracks, that was more than one that was traveling. And I noticed they split up. One went to the left, one went to the right. And I kind of went, isn't that interesting? Now, this is down a trail that we had already used to get to where the wolves were. And then we were coming back through the same trail. So we're not having to plow through snow. But the tracks were on either side of ours, where our little trail was. And I noticed I caught a glimpse of some black moving through the white more than once as I'm walking through and we're heading back. I caught these glimpses on either side of us, and more than once I told them that, pick up your pace. We're being followed, so the cabin's not too far from here. Let's get going. Because it's hard to babysit a bunch of kids that think it's a big joke to be out there, except for whatever they're studying for. So I got them all the way back to the cabin, but I noticed we were still being followed. So everybody gets into the cabin, and I noticed one particular guy who lived, I think he lived in Vancouver, is where he grew up, so he knew nothing of wildlife. And there was a window outside there. All of a sudden, he comes screaming out of that room, and he said something was looking in the window. Something was looking in the window. I said, "What do you mean something was looking in the window?" He said, "Something was looking in the window. It was big, it was black, and it was hairy, and it was looking in the window." Now, this was a window that was about 8 feet up.
Did he describe seeing any eye shine or anything like that? Or
No, all he said was, "I looked up at the window, and I seen this big face looking down at me in the window." And I went, so you noticed them finally. You thought it was a big joke, and all of a sudden we heard the whack on the side of the cabin, and I kind of shook the cabin a little bit, scared him even more. Now he's screaming even more, and it's like, "Stop you screaming. You got to stop screaming. Stop making so much noise. All you're going to do is get them more upset because you're screaming like a little child." It took us about an hour to calm that one down. But for the most part, I said, "You're safe inside here. They can't get in. So don't worry about it." They slapped the side of the building a few times before they finally you could hear them grunting a little bit outside before they left. That night was pretty horroring for them. They were pretty shocked. Even the professors were a little white-faced, going, "Oh, I've never had that close." I said, "Yeah, well, sometimes it happens. They get curious and they look." Because most of the windows in this cabin, okay, now this is a large cabin. This was meant to house at least 16 people.
Okay.
So the windows, a lot of the windows are not just low down, they're up high.
Sure. I mean, as you get a peak in a vault, a lot of times you have windows at different heights. It's not just 8-foot walls you're working with everywhere.
Exactly. So now you got a window that was about 8 feet tall, and he could see squarely the head in the window. That's what scared him. Scared the bejesus out of him.
About how long ago was this?
This was about, let me see, this would have been about 25 years ago.
Okay. So is it, almost 2000? It was late 90s.
Yeah, and they learned that there's more to the wildlife than what they thought. Now, in doing this one encounter that they had, it turned, I think, 4 of them to go and take not just the biology, but
Cryptozoology.
yeah, to add on to their list. Now a bunch of them are intrigued about what the encounters that they were having, because they were looking at the prints, taking measurements, and they were really, really intrigued. It got a lot of people turned on to them.
I thought you were going to say it cost 4 of them to drop out of college.
Well, that
too
one
much
guy,
shock to the system, maybe.
well, that one guy that he did quit. He said, nope, never going to do this again. That's the end of it. End of college.
Well, it would be hard because, you hear people who have had encounters that it drove them to lose the passion for being in the outdoors and camping and hunting or whatever. That just ceases for them to be comfortable in those environments. So if you're going to college trying to prep for a career that's going to have you in the outdoors and you have an experience like that, you're probably looking for a different major if you're not comfortable with.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I as far as I know, he decided he went into being a building designer. I guess he figured that was safer than going out in the bush. I kind of laughed at that, going, well, be safer out in the bush than you would trying to design a building in a city, but that's up to you.
You find out 10 years later he died falling off of a skyscraper or something.
Yeah, something silly like that.
Yeah.
But I've in my life, I've had 4 or 5 face-to-faces where we were so close. And each time that I've had these close to face-to-faces, we've submitted to each other.
Now, and you said that, I think you had told me at one point that most of these encounters were in daylight.
Yeah.
And let me ask you this. I'm just kind of curious, being on a logging crew and in that environment, you guys typically weren't out there a lot in the darkness, were you? I mean, that was pretty much your daytime routine, was get out probably right before sun up and get started setting up and work while the light's up,
Exactly. I mean, you can't work in the dark when you're cutting down trees. You got to be in the light.
Yeah.
So every encounter I've had has all been during the daylight hours. Even to this day, where I had one last year. Up in the Gold River area, this is northwestern side of the island. I've been going a lot into that area because I've had many encounters in that area, whether I've got people with me or not. They seem to, like I said, they stopped hiding from me. They actually come out to the open. Whereas most people, they get them peeking around trees or looking from heavy brush. Well, they step out in front of me all the time. They let me know that they're there.
Do you think that's something that's common for other people, or do you think there's a reason why you're experiencing that?
Well, I think I'm experiencing it because word has been passed on as I've been tagged, as some people like to call it, by them, that I'm a safe person, that I'm not there to harm them. I never have been. And they just automatically, once they know I'm in the area, they come out to the open.
Yeah. I've heard other people talk about that notion or that idea before, that perhaps they do that. I've never had any experience with it, and none of my research or data has shown me that. But that certainly doesn't mean that because it hasn't happened to me, it can't happen to anybody. I don't have that point of view when I try to approach this stuff. So, but if it is a remote area and you're out there, probably for a couple decades, almost daily during the course of your career, I'm not going to say that couldn't happen. I mean, certainly I can see that happening, I guess. Something gets used to you. The idea of it letting others know in its group that maybe they get used to you, or there's communication that this person isn't a threat. But like I say, I just don't have any experience with it. I haven't ever been in a setting where that was the case,
Well, it's like with deer, okay? Now, they'll get used to people and they'll come around, they'll feed around you. They'll be within a
Sure.
certain distance, but they'll still come out and they'll feed around you. And they won't feel threatened.
Yeah, I know that's it. I do a lot of archery hunting, and I've got one stand that I hunt almost every year that's only a couple yards from my house, and it's over either a cut cornfield or a cut bean field, depending on what's in, and it's got a shelter belt to its back. But when I'm in that stand, 16 feet off the ground, the first couple times I sit that stand, the first 2 or 3 nights in a row, I'll have does that are a little reluctant to get real close. But literally within 10 to 15 nights of hunting that stand, I'll have 25, 30 does all standing within 50 yards of me. And I swear to God, they got to know that I'm there. I mean, but they're just used to it.
Yeah.
They've just become used to it.
Exactly. They see
And
you
I hadn't shot at any of them yet with an arrow, so they must not have assumed I was a threat,
Exactly. Now, deer do this a lot. They'll do this in the city. They'll do this. They do this right around here all the time. We have, where I'm living, we have deer that come through here all the time. And they'll walk within 10 feet of you. They'll teach their young that this is a particular spot that they'd like to go to. There's feed there. They're safe. People won't hurt you. We see deer around here all the time. And this is practically year round. So if you're in an area where it is known that Sasquatch will stay because they're omnivores, they'll eat just about anything within reason. If there's a particular berry patch or particular roots like wild onions, there's wild garlic out there. There's lots of edibles out there that they can eat.
Mm-hmm.
They'll come back to that area every year because of the food source.
Sure, you see that with bears too. I mean, the blueberry bushes and stuff that are amongst the cedar scrubs and things in the Pine Island forest, those bears know where those areas are. I mean, they revisit them year after year. They know exactly where almost every damn bush is located.
Exactly. It's the same thing here. Now we have huckleberries, we have blueberries, we have blackberries, we have all kinds of berries that are edible for wildlife. And they know every year where they're being produced, when they're in season, when they're not. Just like here, we being near the water, they'll eat shellfish. They know when there's the proper time of year to eat the shellfish. When the salmon are going upriver, so they go out, they eat salmon. They eat fish.
Yeah.
They know when herds of animals are going through a particular area. They know this, and they come back to this area every year. And they stay there.
I mean, if you look at bears especially, I mean, a salmon run is an opportunity to pack on 20% of your body weight in a pretty, within a few weeks. I mean, they just gorge themselves on it because it's, quote, some pretty low-hanging fruit when it comes to, hunting protein.
Yeah, Sasquatch are the same thing. They'll go after the salmon too. They eat the salmon as well. So I mean, you'll find natives that have set up nets for fishing and stuff up in the rivers and the creeks and stuff. Will have many encounters of knowing that there's Sasquatch that are in the same area doing the same thing as the bears, catching the salmon as they're going through, having a good protein diet for the winter months, putting on lots of feed.
Hmm.
So if you know they're in a certain area, this is why I got to learn where 5 different clans were. It's because there's particular areas that I've gone to that they have everything that they need to eat, and I've found plenty of their shelters. I've found lots of their little arrows, you might call them, pointing towards food sources, where broken trees and bent trees and stuff have pointed towards food sources.
Do you learn a lot of this information as far as, year to year, what's happening? Because obviously it isn't always going to be the same. This stuff kind of moves around, and for instance, I don't think habituation would involve them sleeping in the same spot night after night, year after year. They obviously move around, obviously.
Yes,
But
yes, they
when
do.
you talk to these Native American cultures and areas there, do you learn a lot from them? I mean, do you feel like they're kind of in tune to that
Oh yeah,
still? I mean, I'm sure they were decades ago, but is that still kind of something that's common?
oh yes, yes. There's certain areas where if they don't know you, if the natives don't know you, and you come into that area, they'll tell you, don't go into this area.
Hmm.
Don't go near it. Stay out of this area, because they know the Sasquatch go there every year. Here, because it's so mountainous, there's lots of caves.
Mm-hmm.
And you can find, I've known Sasquatch to share caves with denning bears during the winter months. So they'll share the caves, they'll use the caves, they utilize them. Sometimes year round, sometimes not. It depends on the food source. Most times I found lots of their little beddings that they've made, they've woven, that when they sleep out in the open, I found lots of that. I actually found quite a few of their burial mounds. And I know this for a fact that it's a burial mound because it's nothing but rocks with usually a dirty big rock or a huge, humongous log placed on top. I found lots of them. And I've always found every time I've gone near them, the whole area goes dead quiet.
Hmm.
You don't hear a bird, you don't hear nothing. So you know you're being watched. I've partially uncovered some of these mounds and found rocks. Tons of rocks in there.
Hmm.
And I've looked around and never found a rock within the area.
Hmm.
So they pack the rocks. They do bury their dead. That's one of the reasons you don't find their bodies.
That's something
Even
that's
the
kind
odd
of
bone.
unique to Native American culture too, that I've discovered here in an area that they call Blood Run, that I've been doing some research on, was preparing to make a documentary there, was that it's kind of and we're talking hundreds of years ago they were doing this, when there wasn't machinery, there wasn't they were carrying stuff in baskets over a shoulder when it came to moving dirt and clay. And we're
Yes.
talking about moving rocks and moving clay to areas that there weren't any clay, and making designs and stuff. And I mean big designs in the ground. glyphs, and it's like, dude, I mean, the amount of work and the time it would have taken to transport those types of resources to this area where those resources aren't naturally there. We're talking like a half mile away, to where
Yeah,
50 people, it would have taken them a decade to build some of this stuff, right? Just hauling this stuff every day. So
exactly.
this is the only reason why I bring that up is this is something that Native American culture has practiced over time. And it kind of makes you wonder if Sasquatch had a relationship or at least felt comfortable enough to watch those tribes and learn from them. Is that something that they could have utilized or learned from? You know what I mean?
It's quite possible. It's very possible because I've noticed I found only once have I ever found a bear skull. Only once.
Mm-hmm.
In all the years I've been out in the bush, I've only found one. Now, Sasquatch, I have never found nothing. Not a bone anywhere. But I've found plenty of mounds that were all 6 to 8 feet long, 5 feet wide. Nothing but piles of rocks with a huge, humongous, usually with a huge log or something placed on top. Now, it would take you a long time to dig through all those rocks, but I would guess that you're going to find bones under there.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to find out. I mean, you've
It's just
got
like in,
even in these remote areas. The one thing I have to always try to remember is that even when I'm really off the grid, in whether it's Saskatchewan or somewhere in Montana, and I feel like I'm standing on a ridge, and you get that feeling like maybe I'm the only human that's ever stood there. I don't think there's many places like that on Earth. I think that we have to always look at these areas and say maybe it's been a while, but there have been humans in most of these areas throughout history, just not settling these areas, obviously. But I mean, hunting them, traveling through them. And
oh yeah,
so when you see something like a rock burial mound or what appears to be that, yeah, I'm not going to say that if you dug one up, you wouldn't have found what you're suggesting could be there, but it certainly wouldn't be uncommon for several humans to have died 100 years ago during a traveling party and buried a few people that maybe those rocks are still exposed like that.
well, that's true.
I mean,
But
I'm
how
just
many?
saying, I don't want to look at something and say, must have been Sasquatch without
Well,
acknowledging, look, there's obviously
oh,
other things that we could have been looking at there.
well, that's true. That's true. But most of these mounds that I found are generally bigger than most humans, wider than most humans.
Hmm.
Now, the average Sasquatch that I know of on the island here will grow to about 10, 11 feet tall. They're about
For an
4 feet.
alpha size male, you're
Yeah,
saying full mature.
about 4 to 4.5 feet wide in the shoulders.
Hmm.
Now, when you find mounds like this, that long, that wide, rocks piled up, I mean, piled up like this,
Yeah.
with a dirty big log placed over top, that's not no Native American. That is not no indigenous Indian. They're not that tall.
Mhm.
The average ones around here, even around here that have been here for many, many years, the biggest one is usually around 5'10".
You're saying that's average male height for the indigenous
Yeah,
people in the area.
yeah.
Hmm.
They're going to be 5'10" or lower or smaller. They're not going to need something that's 8 feet long, 5 feet wide. And kind of guarded, you might say, because I've been through a lot of graves, native, a lot of indigenous graveyards and stuff, where they used to bury some of their own. Some they used some of the other practices of burning, but a lot of burying. Um, the forest doesn't go dead quiet. I mean, usually when you're in an area where there's a mound or two, the forest goes dead quiet. I mean, there's not a bird. You're lucky if you hear a bug. And I mean,
And when you're in those remote areas like that, have you noticed other times that it's gone quiet? I mean, is there anything that triggers that?
Oh yes. Many times I've turned around. I could feel eyes on me. Everything's gone dead quiet. I'm looking around, doing a 360 all the way around me, going, where the hell are those eyes coming from? And there's not a bird anywhere. You don't hear a bird anywhere. I've been in many times, and I've figured it out. Okay, the only time a bird, even if there's a cougar moving through the bush or a bear, you're going to hear birds because they won't go after the bird.
Yeah, typically birds will alarm other wildlife when they see an
Exactly.
apex predator moving through the woods. I've seen that with brown bears. I've seen it with cougars. When they're moving around, birds are like sounding the alarm bell.
That's right. The only time it goes dead quiet is when a Sasquatch is going through the area. They're not alarming nothing. They're quiet. You don't hear a bird. You don't hear a chirp. You don't hear a squirrel. You hear nothing. Dead quiet.
The intriguing thing about it is I also notice when I'm walking through an area, the birds are freaking out, letting they perceive you to be as much of a predator as those other animals. And it makes me wonder, the only time I hear that is when I'm there. I'd really be interested in, like, there's times where I have long archery sits and stands where I mean, it's deafening quiet out there when there's nothing moving. The birds don't make any noise. It's almost like you don't hear insects making noise.
Exactly. And yet I've been in areas where it's gone, all of a sudden there's bird life everywhere. There's squirrels making tons of noise as I'm going through the area. Then all of a sudden it goes dead quiet. And I can hear snap. You can hear a bipedal creature moving through the bush, but not a sound from the birds, not a sound from the squirrels. Yet you can hear something big moving through the bush.
Yeah.
I've encountered this many times out here. And it's like, oh, well, I kind of know it's not a bear, because a bear is going to make a little bit more noise than that. And it's not a deer, because the birds and the squirrels aren't going to shut up because a deer's in the area. And it's not a cougar, because you're not going to hear a cougar making that much making that kind of noise, but you can hear the movement of a big creature going through the area. And yet it's dead quiet. There's not a peep out of a bird or a squirrel.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen different reactions like that in nature while hunting, whether or not I'm making myself known in an area or whether I'm, hours later in like a stealth mode, not making any noise. You watch different wildlife move through the area and how different things react to them. And, after a while, you kind of feel like you figure it out and you get used to what will trigger a reaction, what won't. And then every now and then you see something that just kind of goes against what you thought you knew, So, it's, I don't go out there claiming, hey, if you ever hear this, it means that, I want to be careful not to do that, obviously.
Well, I try not and claim that, but usually when you can hear them moving through the bush, and there's not a bird chirping anywhere,
Yeah.
or a squirrel, usually it's a pretty good sign that there's a large predator moving around out there. And why is all this bird life that normally would be raising an alarm is so quiet?
Yeah, that's about you look at this. I think there's a reason why they do that. When they see predators and this and that, I think there's also a reason why certain birds follow predators, because once there's a kill, that predator's not going to eat everything. And therefore crows and different, you see these symbiotic relationships that exist between predators and birds and things like that, some species of birds. But you're right. I mean, there are certain animals that exhibit a different reaction than what other animals do when it comes to how different birds react to that. But again, I mean, it's not something I have a ton of experience with. I certainly couldn't give somebody an explanation as to why this does that, or,
I couldn't really either. I mean, I can give good guesses.
Yeah. I'm a good guesser. but,
but I mean, it's just with my experience, every time it's gone dead quiet in the area that I'm in, I run into Sasquatch every time.
Well, I can tell you, I would love to come out and visit that area. It really is intriguing to hear about, not only that area of Vancouver Island that you grew up, but the areas that you were logging and the remoteness of them, really the vast history of encounters from that area. It's intriguing. I'm glad that you came on and shared your experiences. As somebody who's had an encounter myself, I knew when I started sharing it, not everybody would believe it. There'll be people who don't. I'm fine with that. It's not my burden to help somebody believe something. That's their own journey they're on,
Exactly. I totally agree there.
So, I appreciate that you're willing to talk about this stuff. And like I say, I understand there's people that are going to hear things that different people share in their stories and their experiences and say, well, I've never had that experience, or that's not what I've noticed. And this, I get that. I get that there's going to be reasons why people are reluctant to believe something. But like I say, they're on a journey that has a threshold of truth that they must achieve in order for them to believe in anything, whether that's God, money, Bigfoot, whatever. And it's not my burden to get them there. It's not your burden to get them there. That's the path that they're on. And we're all on a different path with that. So
exactly.
But the last thing I'd want to do is deter somebody from wanting to share their experiences. And that's why I'm grateful that you came on and chose to share them with us. I appreciate that.
Glad that I was able to be able to do this. I mean, I go out every year up in the northwestern areas, like go around Gold River all the time. I have encounters every year. There has not been a year that I have not gone out and not had an encounter.
That's interesting.
And it doesn't matter what lake I go to, what area around there I go to, I have an encounter.
Thank you, Daniel Weeks, for the donation. Also to the others that have donated tonight. I certainly appreciate it. We are grateful for the support that we are shown from you guys here at Untold Radio. And again, Dale, I want to thank you for joining us and sharing tonight. Maybe at some point we'll get you back on again. So,
that'd be a pure pleasure for me.
All right. Well, I will let you go, and I will bring the show to an end. But again, it was awesome having you here.
And I have many, many, many more encounters that I've had all over this island. It just doesn't seem to matter where I go.
Yeah, well, I don't doubt that we could fill another show with them. So that's why I say at some point maybe we'll schedule a time to have you back. But like I
That'd
say,
be good.
I appreciate you showing up and sharing them with us tonight. Thank you so much, Dale.
Well, you're very welcome.
Thank you. So yeah, it's, we're going to. Sometimes I have researchers on that are sharing. They're not really necessarily their experiences, but maybe the data they're looking at, audio recordings they've captured, videos or pictures. I love those shows. I also really like having the shows where we have people on that share their experiences and their encounters. And, like I said earlier in the show, I have to be mindful that because I haven't experienced something, that doesn't mean somebody else can't experience something just because it's different to me. And the last thing I would ever want to do is deter anybody from sharing their experiences or their encounters. You don't need to worry, will people believe me or not? That's up to them whether or not they're going to believe you. It's not your burden. If you've actually had an experience and you come in and want to come on the show and give us an honest account of it, there really shouldn't be a worry of, will somebody believe me or won't they? Come in and give us an honest account, and whether or not they do or not, that's up to them. That's their burden. It's not yours. So I hope people keep that in mind, because whether or not I hear somebody share something with me, and a lot of times with me, it's outside of the Sasquatch arena. It's an area of the paranormal, so to speak, that I'm not familiar with. Somebody tells me a dog man story. Somebody tells me a story about, ghosts or whatever. And I haven't had an experience similar to that. That doesn't mean that I don't want to hear it. I'm intrigued when people share their experiences, and I don't ever want to stop somebody from wanting to share an experience. So, like I say, I invite anybody who's had a Sasquatch account that they would want to share, get a hold of me. pineislandresearch@gmail.com, and we'll get it set up. Faster Man says the Kickstarter is at 76,000 as of this moment. We're getting close, man. It's less than $4,000. I'm telling you, this thing's crawling up like $1,000 every few hours. I'm cautiously optimistic we're going to hit this goal here over the next, I think there's 40 hours left on the Kickstarter. So I encourage everybody to get on and take part in that. Let me put the link up in the chat one more time for anybody who, I put it up earlier, but let me put it up again. Let's see here. There we go. That you click that, it should take you there. Like I say, for $10, man, you get your name in the credits. For $30, you're going to get a free copy of part 1 and part 2 of the Legend Meets Science documentary. I mean, you're basically just prepaying for it. When it's done, you'll receive those. But it's a way to front that $30 and let Doug and his team finish the production. They're ready to go in and get this thing wrapped up and done. And it's going to move along pretty quickly once it's funded. So I'm excited to see what comes down the road with it. I've been anticipating it ever since I first heard about it, because I know how monumental the first Legend Meets Science was to this community. And I've heard nothing but this one's going to be that and more. So I encourage everybody to find it in your heart and to jump on the Kickstarter link and take part in getting it funded. We got about another another 2 days, a little less than 2 days, about 40 hours, I think, left. So, but for all of you who have chosen to spend your Monday night with us, I want you to know we are not blind to the fact that you had other choices, and I appreciate you choosing us. So, you guys have a great rest of your week, and we will see you next Monday night.